Sheriff May Daniels traded her badge for a tractor, but trouble didn't stop at the county line. When her harvest machine vanishes overnight and a smug HOA president leaves a note that reads, "You're welcome," she doesn't get mad, she gets methodical. As Carl tightens his grip on the neighborhood with forged votes and shady tow trucks, May quietly builds a case that will shake the community to its roots. He thought she was just a farmer. He forgot she's the law. And now, her justice is coming with flashing lights and a roaring engine. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. They say the soil remembers every cut, every harvest, every foot that ever walked it. This land keeps the truth better than people do. I came back to my father's farm, thinking I could finally breathe. After 20 years in uniform, patrolling highways, de-escalating bar fights, serving warrants on people who should have known better, I thought trading a badge for a hoe would be. Truth is, I never dropped the badge, just hung it next to my barn coat. This farm's been in my family 3 generations. Corn, squash, strawberries in June. My daddy used to say, "There's no better feeling than sore hands and a full table." He passed 2 summers ago, left me the house, the tractor, and the land. I figured I'd seen enough violence, enough chaos. I wanted quiet, something real, something rooted, so I put my things in storage, drove the county line, and told dispatch I'd be available part-time. Sheriff's badge still on my chest, just under a layer of dust and hay. Life was simple. Morning started before the sun. I'd check the soil, feed the hens, and drink black coffee on the porch, while dew steamed off the fields. I wasn't Sheriff Daniels out here. I was just May. Just a woman trying to do right by her land and her name. Then came Carl, HOA president of Willow Creek Estates. Real estate man turned small-town tyrant. Clean-shaven, shined shoes, clipboard glued to his palm. Always wore navy polos, and that smug smile like he'd won something the rest of us missed. His neighborhood of perfectly spaced cookie-cutter homes butted up against the edge of my eastern field. And Carl, bless his heart, never did understand the difference between his lawn and my land. It started with letters. "Dear property owner," they read, all typed and folded like courtroom exhibits. First it was the tractor he didn't like. Then the old barn siding. Then the unregulated livestock, which, to be clear, was 1 rooster and 3 hens that never once crossed his vinyl fence. I wrote him back once, politely. "This is a working farm, not part of your HOA jurisdiction. Please cease and desist." He didn't. Carl saw my boundaries, legal, physical, moral, and took them as challenges. He started making the rounds, clipboard in hand, snapping photos of my tractor from the public road, like I was some local menace. I found one of his HOA flyers tacked to my mailbox offering community improvement guidelines for outlier properties. I wasn't part of their HOA, but Carl had ideas about annexation, ideas he hadn't quite made public yet. Neighbors started murmuring about new rules. Carl wanted to beautify the perimeter. I was the perimeter. Let me be clear, I've handled hostage negotiations, dealt with cartel mules, and once wrestled a drunk ex-linebacker into cuffs outside a bowling alley. But this slow, creeping infringement? This was a different beast entirely. It didn't shout. It whispered. And it had paperwork. The ironic thing? I left the city to escape power games. And here I was, on the land my great-grandmother broke her back to till, being told by a smug HOA president where I could and couldn't park a machine my family's owned longer than his whole subdivisions existed. I hadn't worn my service belt in weeks. But when I saw Carl's latest letter, bold print, red ink, "Final warning," something stirred. It wasn't rage. Not yet. It was memory. This land remembers. And so do I. I always believed a person's home should be the one place they didn't have to look over their shoulder. The badge taught me how to read a room, to spot when something was off. But there's a special kind of discomfort when that instinct kicks in while you're on your own porch, coffee mug in hand, and realize you're being watched. It started small, just a flicker of chrome catching sunlight from the road. Carl's SUV parked a little too long by the fence line. Camera lens poking through the half-open window. At first I thought maybe he was checking something on his GPS. But it became a pattern. Always mid-morning, always angled toward the barn. Then came the second letter. Notice of non-compliant equipment, it said in blocky bold font. Unauthorized machinery, rusted, visible from community sightlines, must be removed immediately or stored in an enclosed structure. It was addressed to property occupant. Real personal touch. The tractor in question, a 1968 Massey Ferguson my father rebuilt with his bare hands. Sure, the paint had faded, but the engine ran smooth, and more importantly, it was parked behind the barn, not visible from any of Carl's cookie-cutter cul-de-sacs, unless someone was deliberately creeping up the easement road. I replied in writing again. Firm, factual, polite. Per County Agricultural Ordinance 4.6b. Working farm equipment on agriculturally zoned land is exempt from municipal or HOA visual codes. Kindly refrain from further notices. This is not HOA-governed land. That should have ended it. But Carl wasn't the kind of man who let facts get in the way of a crusade. Especially not from someone he didn't see as his equal. Maybe it was because I was a woman. Maybe it was because I hadn't shown up to his community meet-and-greet brunch. Maybe he just didn't like that I said no without asking permission first. Whatever it was, something in him turned after that. He started showing up with others. First it was a woman named Denise, tight-lipped, clipboard in hand, nodding solemnly at everything he said. Then there was a man in golf shorts, who never spoke but took constant notes. HOA board members, apparently. Carl had rallied his troops. He called it a visual perimeter audit. I called it what it was, trespassing with extra steps. One day, I caught Denise peeking through the slats of my back fence. She flinched when I stepped out of the barn, like a raccoon caught at the trash bin. "Oh, I didn't realize anyone was home," she said. I didn't smile. It's a farm. We're always home. The letters escalated. Now it was possible livestock overage, deteriorating auxiliary structures, non-compliant perimeter growth, my hedgerow, my chicken coop. Even the hay tarp got a citation. It would have been laughable if it hadn't started feeling so damn personal. See, Carl didn't care about aesthetics. Not really. This wasn't about grass height or peeling lint. It was about control. He couldn't stand that there was land next to his that he didn't own, influence, or dictate. My tractor? That wasn't an eyesore to him. It was a flag, a declaration that he didn't run everything. The worst part? I started second-guessing myself. I'd walk out to the barn and pause. Was the tractor angled too close to the fence? Did the tarp flap in the wind too loud? Was that rooster crowing too early again? This land had been my refuge, and now I was watching my back on it. I called the county clerk to confirm again that I was fully exempt from HOA authority. She laughed and said, "Sheriff, you're more qualified to write zoning law than I am." Still, Carl kept pushing. He started leaving flyers under my windshield when I parked in town. One read, "Join the movement to clean our perimeter." Settle. I heard from a neighbor that Carl was polling HOA members about expanding jurisdiction to ensure harmony and safety across the rural border. He wanted to bring in outlier properties under what he called community cohesion. Sounded like a nice phrase, until you realized it meant seizing control from people who'd never agreed to his rules in the first place. It was like being boxed in slowly, one hedge at a time. I wasn't scared, not yet, but I was uneasy. This wasn't some thief in the night or a brawl outside a bar. This was legal manipulation, wrapped in politeness and paper trails. And I knew exactly where that kind of campaign could go if no one pushed back. So I stood my ground, kept my tractor parked, kept my badge close. Not out in the open, but not forgotten either. Carl wanted a fight. I wasn't about to give him one. At least, not the kind he was expecting. The morning it happened, the air was heavy with harvest heat. The kind of morning that smells like earth and sweat and promise. I'd planned to be out in the fields by 7. Corn was coming fast, and the weather window was closing. But when I rounded the barn, everything stopped. The tractor was gone. At first my brain tried to make sense of it. Maybe I'd moved it and forgotten. Maybe a neighbor borrowed it. Maybe, but no. The fresh tire tracks leading to the road told a different story. My tarp was still crumpled on the ground where it had been draped across the hood. The barn door hung open just enough to whisper, someone was here. I turned toward the mailbox. That's when I saw the note. It wasn't typed, just a scrap of printer paper, taped there with bright blue masking tape like a child's drawing on a fridge. Esor removed. You're welcome. HOA. My first instinct was to tear it in half. My second was colder. I didn't go to the neighbors. I didn't shout. I went inside, poured myself a fresh cup of coffee, sat down at the kitchen table, and opened the county access portal. Being sheriff has its privileges, quiet ones. Every towing request in the county gets logged. I searched the last 24 hours. There it was. One Massey Ferguson, red, listed as abandoned agricultural equipment. Towed at 3:17 a.m., filed under Emergency Visual Blight Enforcement. Filed by ClearPath Neighborhood Services. I knew the name. Carl had mentioned them once, bragging at a Chamber of Commerce mixer about his HOA's streamlined property response partners. I did a quick record search. Sure enough, Carl Jennings owned 32% of ClearPath, under a Shell LLC registered out of state. That meant Carl not only initiated the complaint, he profited from the tow. That's when I stopped drinking my coffee. This wasn't incompetence. This wasn't ignorance of boundaries. This was an operation. Within the hour, I'd pulled Carl's HOA filings from public record and checked the digital trail on his board's votes. That's when I found it. An unsecured HOA discussion thread from a community forum, cached in Google's archive before the post had been removed. The subject line read, Sheriff Daniels, ongoing disruption. Carl had posted it himself. She's a liability with a badge. If we don't assert authority now, we'll lose the expansion vote. She thinks she's above the process, but perception matters. We need to treat this like an invasion. Push the motion. Get a majority. Annex the eastern border. He signed it, CJ. The replies were mixed. A few hesitant voices, but more than enough cheerleaders to move forward. So that was it. Not just a vendetta, a strategy. Carl wanted to absorb my land, my life into his little empire of lawn inspections and fence color guidelines. And the only thing standing in his way was me, the sheriff who didn't play by his rules, the woman he couldn't fine, couldn't shame, couldn't box in. Until now, he thought taking the tractor would break me, provoke me, maybe even humiliate me. He wasn't trying to win a dispute. He was making a statement. But the thing about making statements, they leave evidence. I forwarded the tow report, the HOA post, and Carl's LLC ownership docs to my personal case file. Then I picked up the phone, called the county legal department, and requested preliminary guidance on misuse of private authority under the pretense of municipal power. They asked if this was an active criminal inquiry. Not yet, I said. But it's about to be. I didn't slam the phone down. I didn't curse. I just stood up, walked back outside, and stared at the patch of earth where my tractor used to be. The soil remembered. And so did I. Carl thought I was a liability with a badge. He was about to find out what happens when the law isn't just on your side. It's your name on the door. There's an art to enforcement. Most people think it's all flashing lights and loud commands. But the real work, the kind that lasts, it's done quietly. In forms, in filings, in shadows where the gavel hasn't yet echoed. I didn't march over to Carl's office. I didn't yell in the street or post warnings online. I opened a case file under a provisional tag. Unauthorized use of municipal language for personal gain. Then I started digging. ClearPath Neighborhood Services had a reputation in a few neighboring counties, most of it bad. They weren't technically licensed as a law enforcement contractor, but Carl had been using their logo on HOA notices like they were sworn officers. They issued compliance summonses with no legal standing. One elderly man in the northern cul-de-sac paid $2,300 in fines to avoid a lien that was never real. Carl pocketed. I requested Carl's filings with the county clerk. Took a couple days to pull it all, but once I had the documents spread across my kitchen table, patterns emerged. The most damning was a series of community expansion surveys, mailed out over the last 3 months. Official-looking forms, HOA letterhead, gold-embossed seals. They weren't just misleading, they were fraudulent. The language implied that annexation into the HOA was already underway. Final review of your compliance integration was how he phrased it. Homeowners who didn't respond were counted as assumed affirmative. Classic bait and count. Then came the quorum sheets. According to Carl's internal minutes, the HOA had reached a 67% majority vote to annex all bordering properties. But the list of voters included 3 households that had moved out, 2 deceased property owners, and a vacant rental currently bank-owned. Carl had forged consent to expand his reach. He wasn't just skirting the law anymore, he was rewriting it. I kept my face neutral as I organized the evidence into a chain of custody report. That's the thing about being sheriff. Everyone thinks it's the gun on your hip that holds power. But it's the signature, the seal, the knowledge of where to send a document so it doesn't disappear in a pile. I called up Andrea Powell, deputy counsel with the county legal department. We'd crossed paths during a multi-county irrigation dispute a few years back. Smart, steady, didn't waste words. "Tell me this is as bad as it looks," I said, after I emailed her the packet. She called back 10 minutes later. "It's worse," she replied. We didn't need dramatics after that. I requested quietly a temporary injunction on all HOA boundary expansions and enforcement actions, citing pending investigation into procedural fraud and possible misrepresentation under Civil Code 8. The county could issue a provisional hold without alerting the HOA directly for 14 business days. That gave me 2 weeks. 2 weeks to trace the money, 2 weeks to line up the homeowners. Carl had tricked. 2 weeks to pull the rug out from under him while he kept dancing like he ran the place. I didn't wear my uniform that week. Didn't need to. I was back in boots, hair tied, working the fields like always. Only now, every call I took while hauling crates or patching fence was about one thing: building a net Carl wouldn't see coming. Neighbors started talking, quietly. Once they heard the expansion vote was frozen, more came forward. One woman had received 5 notices in 4 days for violations she didn't even understand. A retired teacher was threatened with grass height escalation charges, which, as Andrea confirmed, don't exist. Carl was running a private kingdom with forged paper and polished shoes. But he'd forgotten something essential. Kingdoms fall fastest when they never expected a rebellion. I wasn't rebelling, though. I wasn't even resisting. I was restoring order. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, a woman who moved back to the land for peace, weaponizing zoning law and civil procedure like a scalpel. And Carl. He still thought I was just a farmer with an attitude. Let him. Silence has weight when you know it's not going to last. The week after the injunction landed, quietly, anonymously, without a single press release, the air changed. Not for the public, not for the county, but for me. Carl knew something had shifted. And like any man used to unchecked control, he didn't handle it well. The first notice came tucked under my windshield wiper at the feed store. Failure to maintain visual uniformity, citation, for a toolbox mounted on my rear hitch. The next day, another arrived by mail. Unauthorized agricultural runoff risk, citation. No rain had fallen in 5 days. By Thursday, they were arriving daily. Fines for improper line of sight from public view. Unregistered poultry, even a citation accusing my weathered garden bench of being structurally obsolete and publicly visible. It was a paper war, death by clipboard. I didn't pay them. I didn't call. I didn't acknowledge a single envelope. That weekend, I returned from town to find a strange car idling by the edge of my property. A man in khakis, sunglasses, and an HOA-branded vest was walking around the far edge of my field, snapping pictures of my irrigation pump like he owned the place. I didn't flash a badge. I didn't even speak. I stepped out of my truck, crossed the distance slow and steady, and stopped exactly on the legal boundary line. He looked up, startled. I didn't smile. "Private property," I said, voice low. He hesitated. "Just part of a perimeter audit. Authorized HOA inspection." "This land isn't under HOA jurisdiction," I said. "And if you take one more step, I'll write you up for trespassing with intent to document. That's a Class C misdemeanor in this county. You want me to cite the code?" He left. Fast. That night, I sat at the table, going over crop yields and expense sheets, and the numbers were grim. The delay from losing the tractor meant missed optimal harvesting. The corn in the eastern field had started to dry and spot 3 weeks too soon. I'd lost time I couldn't buy back, and it was costing me. The land had never failed me, but now I was bleeding slow, quiet, while Carl bled me on paper. Fine by fine. Then came the whisper. One of the newer board members, young guy, soft-spoken, always looked a little too uncomfortable during Carl's rants, showed up at my gate just after dusk. He didn't say much, just handed me a sealed envelope and walked away like his shoes were on fire. Inside was a draft petition. Motion to evaluate landowners' fitness to maintain property within a managed community per Uniform Standards Protocol. The target? Me. Carl wasn't just fining me now, he was building a paper trail to have me declared incompatible with community values. He wanted to claim my refusal to comply was endangering property harmony and livability metrics. In short, he was trying to write me off the land. It should have broken something in me. But instead, it clarified. I didn't retaliate. I didn't storm a meeting or slam a desk. I got up the next morning, fed the chickens, checked the barn door, ran my hand through the dry stalks, and marked down what I could still salvage. I walked the perimeter, measured the exact footage Carl's auditors had trespassed, and documented every citation, every envelope, timestamp, and signature. My hands were dirty. My patience was thin. But my case, it was airtight. Let him file every paper he wanted. He was building my evidence, one envelope at a time. There's a moment right before the first swing of the sickle, when the air holds still. That breathless pause before harvest begins. You've waited, tended, endured, and now it's time to cut. Carl didn't know it yet, but his season was over. I wasn't waiting for justice anymore. I was harvesting it. It started with a sealed subpoena, hand-delivered to Clear Path Neighborhood Services, signed by the county judge after I submitted my case file through internal channels. No headlines, no warning, just a quiet envelope with teeth. They were required to hand over everything. Towing records, dispatch call logs, billing invoices, vehicle storage reports. By law, they had 10 business days. They cracked in 4. The documents filled 2 boxes. Carl had authorized the removal of 12 vehicles from non-HOA properties over the last 3 months. All tagged as abandoned, all lacking any municipal approval, and all towed by his own company, then stored at above-market fees at a lot he conveniently co-owned across county lines. The kicker? HOA funds had paid for it. Every tow billed to community nuisance removal. Every invoice rubber-stamped by Carl. He wasn't cleaning up the neighborhood. He was profiting off it. I cross-referenced towing dates with internal HOA communications, the ones I'd quietly archived. Several of the vehicles belonged to owners Carl had personal disagreements with. One had argued with him about fencing codes. Another had declined his invitation to an HOA mixer. And one, a retired Navy vet, had reported Carl for harassing his wife over wind chimes. This wasn't policy enforcement. It was retaliation with a revenue stream. But the real nail in the coffin came with the board expansion documents. Carl had never filed the required municipal notification forms for annexation. No legal notices. No neighborhood vote thresholds submitted to the county. No certified community meetings logged in the public record. His majority vote was a fiction, a stage play for power. So I made my move. I called in Karen Velez, a county auditor with a reputation for ice-cold compliance checks and a zero-tolerance policy for improvised accounting. Karen didn't knock on Carl's door. She walked straight into the HOA board office with a suspension order signed by the County Financial Oversight Committee. All discretionary HOA funds. Frozen pending investigation. No more petty fines. No more trumped-up citations. No more checks cut to towing companies with overlapping ownership. Just silence. The kind of silence that makes men like Carl sweat. That afternoon, I walked the length of my field, the late sun burning orange across the stalks. The corn was dry, yes, but not dead. And neither was I. Carl had spent weeks trying to make me flinch. Death by paper, power plays, and petty escalation. He thought wearing a polo and running a neighborhood made him untouchable. But he forgot what a sheriff really is. Not just a badge or a title. We're guardians of order. And I had just restored it, inch by inch, signature by signature. Carl tried to call me that evening. My phone rang twice. I didn't answer. Instead, I drafted a final report for the county investigator assigned to the HOA probe. I included a detailed timeline, scanned copies of every forged vote, audio clips from the board meeting leaks, and a summary of every false claim filed through ClearPath. I sent it in with the subject line, Harvest Report, Culminating Actions Enclosed. Then I poured myself a whiskey, walked back to the porch, and watched the horizon stretch gold over the land my daddy left me. This was the harvest Carl never saw coming. And I wasn't even done yet. Carl tried to cancel the meeting, claimed a scheduling conflict, said the venue had a maintenance issue, suggested postponing until further notice due to recent legal distractions. But the county clerk wasn't having it, and neither was I. So on Thursday night, with every folding chair filled and the air heavy with resentment, I walked into the Willow Creek Community Hall in full uniform for the first time since the day I moved back. Not to intimidate, to remind. The chatter dimmed the moment I entered. Some turned their heads. Some stood. Carl froze mid-sentence as I took a seat near the front row, right beside the mic. The HOA board tried to run the meeting like nothing was wrong. Budget updates, law and ordinance reviews. Then Carl cleared his throat and began to speak. We know there's been some confusion surrounding property boundaries and governance authority. Let me assure you, the board has followed every process in accordance with our. I stood. Not abruptly, just firmly. The room hushed. I have something to share, I said, pulling a small speaker from my pocket and placing it gently on the table, recorded during a board strategy call. Time-stamped and submitted for legal review. Carl's eyes narrowed. That's not authorized. I pressed play. She's wearing that badge like it still means something out here. We push the annexation paperwork through quietly. We document her as non-compliant, and eventually the land folds under HOA control. Trust me, legal pressure works better than a fight. She'll move or break. Either way, we win. His voice, crisp but confident, caught. The silence after the audio cut was louder than any shout could have been. Then the room erupted. You said we voted on annexation. My wife and I never even got the form. Is that why my pickup disappeared last month? You told us this was about beautification, Carl. Who else knew about this? One man in the back, a tall veteran with a service dog, stepped forward, yanked off his HOA badge, and tossed it to the ground. I didn't sign up for this. Carl's face had gone ghost pale. He stammered, tried to raise a hand like he could wave it all away. Let's all stay civil. This recording lacks context. I turned toward the side door and gave a single nod. The door opened. A state officer entered, clipboard in hand, expression unreadable. I reached into my folder and handed over a stack of sealed documents. Per County Order 1234-1 and State Code 7849-N, I said calmly. Carl Jennings is under investigation for fraudulent use of HOA funds, falsification of community voting records, and illegal towing for profit operations conducted under false municipal authority. The officer didn't say a word. He just stepped toward Carl, slowly, methodically. Carl backed up like the walls were closing in. This is ridiculous. I'm a board president. You were, I corrected. He didn't resist. Not physically, but his face twisted in disbelief, the entire walk out the door. Like the town he tried to control had just turned to dust in his hand. I looked around the room at the neighbors who'd stayed quiet, endured the fines, swallowed the shame. They weren't quiet anymore. They were standing. Not for me. For themselves. I didn't raise my voice that night. I didn't have to. The facts did it for me. It rolled in just after sunrise, same as it had every morning of harvest season for the last 40 years. Same cracked seat. Same sun-faded red hood. Same dent on the side panel where my father had once clipped a fence post in '87 and swore the machine would never forgive him. Only now, it was spotless, polished to a shine. And it didn't arrive alone. 2 county patrol cruisers escorted the flatbed down the gravel lane, lights flashing not in emergency but in respect. Slow, deliberate, not a single tire touched the edge of Carl's neatly manicured HOA property. They pulled right up to the same patch of earth from which it had been stolen in the dark of night. And there, without ceremony, the driver lowered the ramp. The tractor touched ground like it had never left. I didn't speak, didn't wave, just walked up, laid my hand on the warm metal, and stood there for a moment, long enough for the soil beneath my boots to feel right again. Neighbors emerged one by one, from porches, from garden sheds, from the alley between lots where the HOA had once patrolled for non-conforming mulch. And they clapped. Not a cheer, not a chant, just honest applause. Not for me necessarily, but for what had returned, for what had been defended. Across the road, the Willow Creek HOA office stood locked. Carl's name had been scraped from the sign already, and earlier that morning, I'd received formal notice that every remaining board member had resigned. One woman, a single mom I'd seen at the feed store but never properly met, walked over with her 2 boys in tow. She held a folded copy of the HOA's charter. "They're voting this week," she said quietly, "to strip the HOA of any towing authority. County's backing it. It's gonna pass." I nodded once. It should. In the distance, the dust trail from the patrol cars slowly disappeared over the ridge. Carl wouldn't be back. Not anytime soon. He'd been charged with fraud, illegal seizure of private property, falsifying municipal documents, and misappropriation of funds. The county prosecutor was building a tight case, and with every file I'd handed over, the screws had tightened further. He'd never expected the law to bite back, especially not from someone he thought was just a farmer with a badge collecting dust. But justice had its own harvest, and I'd brought it in early. The air smelled like dry hay and diesel, honest smells, the kind that outlast titles and turf wars. I climbed up into the driver's seat of the tractor and turned the key. It sputtered once, then roared to life like it had been waiting for me. I didn't drive it far, just a slow circle around the front of the property, past the mailbox where the first threat had been taped, and back again to its rightful place by the barn. I shut off the engine and stepped down. No fanfare, no speeches, just one woman standing on her land, surrounded by people who finally saw what had been happening in plain sight. I never raised a gun, never slammed a door, never stooped to Carl's tactics. I didn't need to. I had the truth. I had the law. And I had the land. The land is quiet now. Not silent, no, a farm never sleeps. But quiet in the way that tells you a season has ended and something honest has been laid to rest. The last of the corn came in under a soft October sky. Not the best yield I've had, not by a long shot, but enough. Enough to keep the pantry full and the books balanced. Enough to remind me why this land matters. Why I came back. Some mornings I still half expect to see Carl's SUV idling by the fence line, clipboard in hand, that smirk playing at the edge of his mouth like he knew something no one else did. But all that's left of him now is a sealed sign on the HOA office and a chain of court dates stretching into next spring. The board voted, unanimously, no HOA in Willow Creek may unilaterally seize, fine, or tow without municipal oversight ever again. The rules are finally written in ink that Carl can't smudge.
And me?
I park the tractor in the same spot every evening, right where it was towed from under cover of darkness. Not out of spite, not to provoke, as a marker. A quiet reminder that this land isn't governed by fear or vanity. It's governed by sweat, by roots, by legacy, and by law. Carl thought power was about control. About how many letters he could send, how many signatures he could fake, how much discomfort he could inflict without crossing the line. He forgot the line moves when truth shows up with a badge and a stack of evidence. I didn't win because I wore the uniform. I won because I knew when to wear it. Because I knew the code book better than he knew his clipboard. Because I let him walk deep enough into his own trap that, by the time he looked up, I was already holding the rope. People think law is about catching bad guys. Sometimes it is. But more often, it's about protecting the good ones, the ones too tired to fight, too polite to push back, too isolated to see the rules being rewritten around them. The woman 3 doors down told me her wind chimes are back up. The Navy vet got his truck returned. No fees, no questions. Even the fence at the edge of Willow Creek looks different now. Less like a border, more like a bridge. Funny thing is, I didn't move back here to make a point. I came for the quiet, for the rhythms I missed after 2 decades chasing sirens and chasing people who'd forgotten what decency looked like. I didn't want to fight. But when it came to me, I met it the way this land taught me. Patiently, steadily, and without fear. There's a kind of justice that doesn't need applause. It doesn't scream or shake fists. It just stands firm, season after season, like the fence post that never rots and the oak that outlives storms. That's what this place is now. Not a battlefield, a boundary. Carl forgot who he was dealing with. He thought he could wear me down with paperwork and pride. But the land remembers. It remembers every hand that shaped it, every boot that walked it, every storm it outlasted. And now, it remembers that the law doesn't just belong in courtrooms or on squad cars. Sometimes, it rides a tractor home. Think your HOA drama's bad? You haven't seen what happens when the sheriff owns the soil. If you live for legal traps, poetic justice, and power flipping on its head, stick around. The next battle might not be over a tractor. It might be your fence, your dog, or your grandmother's rose garden. And trust us, someone always forgets who they're dealing with.